My name's Vicky Hall, and I'm absolutely delighted to invite you here this evening. What an event, what an amazing event that our local teams put together, and I'll make sure I thank them at the end. As I say, my name's Vicky Hall. I'm delighted to welcome you here. I live in the village in Forest Row with my husband and my young son. We've been here about 4 years, and I've been a little bit involved in XR, but having had a baby, I've been away for a while, so I'm just stepping back into the fold now. Welcome to Wealden's Question Time. We're going to hear from local people and local candidates about their hopes and pledges for the future in terms of our climate.
Not hearing you well.
Yeah, can we turn it up?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Lovely. I have a quick ask for you. We may have some electrosensitive people in the room, so if I can ask you to either turn your telephones off or put them on airplane mode, that would be most appreciated. So I'm sure you're excited about tonight's events. I certainly am. And I think we probably all have our own reasons for being here. Mine is my young son, and when I think of him, I think, what am I doing to support his future? And we can all do our bit in small ways, but it is my belief that the people in power are the ones that can make the real difference. So I'm delighted to be able to hear from those people who are willing to step into that space and share with us what they hope to be able to achieve for the future. And I would like to invite everyone in the room just to settle and take half a minute to connect to your personal reason for being here. Whether it's your children, whether you're curious, whether you've got a burning desire to do something for the climate. Let's all just together just take a moment to be here and connect to that. Okay, so the way things are going to run tonight are I'm going to put an initial question to the panel, which they will have seen pre-prepared. Then we'll go to audience questions, and I think we have a number of questioners in the room. I'll do my best to get through as many questions as possible, but with these things we'll see how many we get through. And to close, we will hear from the panel about their ambitions and their vision for the future. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce the panel. So, I'll go from my right first. Delighted to welcome Mairead Godber, a student at Michael Hall School. Do you want to make yourself known? Give a wave.
Hello.
Then to Mairead's left we have Georgia Taylor, the Wealden parliamentary candidate for the Green Party. Then in the middle, Chris Bowers, the Wealden parliamentary candidate for the Lib Dems. And then we have Angie Smith, Wealden parliamentary candidate for the Labour Party. And next to me, Anna Hope, our author, mother, arrestee, and member of Extinction Rebellion. The question that we put to the candidates to prepare or the panel members to prepare ahead of tonight was, what is your response to Extinction Rebellion's 3 core demands? So if you're not familiar with the demands, I'll read them out very quickly. The first one is tell the truth. The government must tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency, working with other institutions to communicate the urgency for change. The second demand is act now. Government must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025. And finally, the third demand, beyond politics. Government must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. And so, over to the panel. I'm going to give each of you 2 minutes to frame your responses to those 3 demands. And is it okay if I ask Mairead to let us know what your thoughts are first? Thank you.
So in response to the first demand, tell the truth, I think that something that moves people to be active in a conscious change of their ways is knowing what they're really dealing with, and hiding behind white lies or withholding the truth are things which really limit the provocation of a real movement which is much more radical, as it now really needs to be, so the truth must be told. In response to demand 2, some people say that the target is too high and that people are being ambitious, but I think it's a classic example of aiming high to allow a relatively high achievement, assuming that the government and our society may not achieve the highest due to disagreements and differences in opinion. And aiming low would most likely result in achieving little to nothing, and the high target stresses the urgency. And in terms of a citizens' assembly, I think that right now representation isn't really being achieved with the current system, and discussion and the hearing of other people's voices is key to arriving at your own informed opinion, which can then contribute successfully to the making of important decisions. And I believe that people of all walks of life have a right to participate in the decisions that are being made involving their own future.
Thanks very much, Lorraine, for kicking us off. And so now to Georgia Taylor, candidate for the Green Party. Your response.
Hi, it's so lovely to see you all here. I've worked in parts of the world where the climate disaster is already happening. There are people suffering from conflict, from hunger and trauma. And the story behind this is rampant inequality and abuse of power. And XR3 demands are challenging that power. So on behalf of the Green Party, I'd just like to respond. So tell the truth. Well, the Green Party has always told the truth. We have been telling the truth about climate disaster for many years, and we will continue to. And the truth is that I'm scared, and I'm appalled by the lack of urgent action from the government and from private sector in this country. Number 2, act now. Well, the great thing about the Green Party is that we are acting now. In fact, you know, we might think this target is ambitious, but, you know, in 2008, Caroline Lucas was proposing the Green New Deal already as a response to the financial crisis, and that was rejected. But I can guarantee that every single Green Party candidate that's standing in this election is absolutely focused on tackling this climate emergency, and every single sitting representative at local or national government is acting now within their power that they have. So we are proposing in our acting now, if we were to get into power, a Green New Deal that will spend $100 billion a year in investment to transform our economy and the way we live, transforming things like housing, transport, industry, food and farming. We would put a new government department into place headed by a carbon chancellor who would be sitting right in the heart of power at number 11 Downing Street. And we would also propose a Future Generations Act, which would make us accountable to our children and our grandchildren. These are among other things. Beyond politics, democracy is broken and people have no say. We will empower people to take part, and we'll make sure every vote counts with proportional representation.
Thanks very much,
Citizens' assemblies are
stop you there.
central to our democratic and
That's our 2 minutes
Thanks.
up. Well done, thank you. And now Chris, representing the Lib Dems.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm delighted to see the waves that Extinction Rebellion has created this year. This was me 30 years ago. I was a student when I realised that without a healthy environment, all else was secondary. Not unimportant, but secondary. And as part of my own contribution, I founded the Environmental Transport Association back in 1990, an idea I brought over from Switzerland. I've also been heavily involved with the European Federation for Transport and Environment, a Brussels-based umbrella organisation. And because of that background, I was asked by the Liberal Democrat team that updated our climate change policy earlier this year to lead the transport section of that. So I am very well acquainted with the Lib Dem policy that forms our climate policy in our manifesto this time. And so if I match that up with the 3 demands, I can go along with, let's say, 1 and 2 halves. Tell the truth, absolutely. Make it a climate emergency, yes, this is an urgent matter and we've got to get on with this right now. No problem with that one. In terms of citizens' assemblies, yes, we are all in favour of citizens' assemblies. The one thing I slightly disagree with Extinction Rebellion on is that Extinction Rebellion seems to be implying that these citizens' assemblies should have decision-making powers. Not entirely sure about that, because I think there's some democratic deficit involved. People who make decisions have got to be accountable, and you have to be able to vote them out of office if necessary. So I'm a little bit worried about that, but yes, citizens' assemblies definitely, as long as it doesn't slow down the process, because it's urgent. The final one, and this is where I would warn you, beware of politicians who get involved in auctions. We've seen this on things like housing problems, where one party says we'll build this many houses and another party tries to trump them. We're seeing this again on the date for net zero carbon. Everybody's trying to be lower than everybody else is. You've got to be realistic about this, otherwise it's going to be a complete misunderstanding. We have a later date than some parties, but we have a plan for an immediate emergency 10-year plan so that we extend the time we have in order to tackle climate emissions. So yes, our date is 2045. Anything earlier than that we think is entirely unrealistic.
Thanks, Chris.
I'll explain more in answer to various questions.
I'm sure you'll get a chance. Thank you. And now over to Andy representing the Labour Party.
Hi, thank you. So I was out knocking on doors in Crowborough the other day, just down the road, and I got into a very long conversation with an 84-year-old man who proceeded to entirely debunk climate change. He claimed that he'd been watching YouTube and everything that was being said in the press about the climate emergency was wrong. So this is why we need, obviously, to ensure that the truth actually does get out there. So we know that a fundamental truth that is not being told is that climate change is inextricably linked with capitalism and neoliberalism. Most of the climate emergency that we find is related to exploitation for profit. So if you consider, for example, oil spills, exploitation of rainforests, culling of wildlife, all of those relate to the search for a buck or a pound. So it's absolutely essential that the truth gets out there and that we are all together, not just singly telling the truth and making sure that people listen. In terms of acting now, we can look at this on several levels. So I myself do everything I possibly can to live plastic free. I'm trying, not too successfully. I've managed 2 days a week, but I'm trying to go vegan. Everyone can do their little bit. I'm really proud to be a town councillor on Uckfield Town Council, who are a very green local authority, and I'm a member of their climate emergency committee, and we have declared a climate emergency mimicking Wealden District Council. But I'm also very, very proud that my party, the Labour Party, has come out with a really great suite of climate policies. I'm absolutely proud of that. So I think that by following those policies, we can act and we can do this together.
That's great. Hang on 2 minutes, thank you. And over to Anna, author of Letters to the Earth.
Co-curator, definitely not the author. It's been written by a lot of people. Tell the truth. What does it mean to tell the truth? Well, I think if we told the truth, is this on actually? Can you hear me? Yeah. I mean, on one level, telling the truth is to say that we're facing absolute cataclysm if we don't change course. That 1 in 4 mammals in the UK are threatened with extinction. The truth about terrifying feedback loops, that we are entering into completely uncharted territory as a species. The last time there was this much CO2 in the atmosphere, 97% of all life on Earth was extinct. That's some truth. But, facts can only do so much. Facts can terrify us into action, but they can also terrify us into numbness. And I feel as though any truth-telling, whether it's from the government or whether it's from Extinction Rebellion, has to come with a vision of a different future and a different way that we can live together. And so I would say that acting now, of course, a Green New Deal, what a fantastic idea. But if it's just another version, if it's just sort of capitalism 2.0, the green industrial revolution, that's not actually solving the deep, deep story that has got us into this mess. And that deep story is based on a myth of scarcity. And this is something that we have to address as a species. And we can only address it by being together. We can only address it by listening to each other, by sharing. And I think citizens' assemblies are an amazing idea. But I would just say, alongside those citizens' assemblies, we need sharing circles. You know, we need to be able to be together. I wish the lights would come up a little bit, because I find it really odd that you were all in the dark, for instance. I can't see any of you out there. Bodies in space, that's what Extinction Rebellion did so magnificently in their actions in London. Bodies together in space, experiencing something that we could not have known before we got together on those streets. And what we experienced was love, I would say, in action. And that's what we need.
And so, my role this evening really is to make sure that we get as many questions from the audience heard as possible. I'll be channeling Fiona Bruce as best I can, and that does mean that I will be sticking to the 2 minutes per person and asking you to stop if I need to, and I hope that's acceptable to everybody. So, with no further ado, I'd like to go out to the first question, which I believe is going to be asked by Laura Jordan.
Okay, there is no doubt that climate change is the biggest issue of our time. To address this, we must rapidly move away from the carbon-heavy industries. How would the different parties address the issue of workers' rights, and how would they ensure a swift and just transition?
Thanks, Laura. Okay, if I can ask Chris to start us off, please.
Yeah, I mean, I recently wrote a chapter for a book on equality called The Wolves in the Forest, on inequality and climate change. And actually, we've got used over the years to talking about environment and social justice, and this is very important actually. We must make sure that we tackle the climate issue, but we don't do it in a way that somehow entrenches inequalities. We've got to make sure that you talk about workers' rights, but it's also, if you look at the impact on climate change, it has a much bigger impact on people in the poorer parts of the world. Hurricane Katrina was a classic example of that back in 2005, where large parts of America were incredibly badly hit by exceptional weather. We've got to move to a change by making sure that not everything is done through the price mechanism. There are essentially two ways of doing things. One, through the price mechanism to create incentives. That's fine in terms of creating a climate for innovation. But if you do everything with the price mechanism, you will get a situation a bit like a congestion charge, where those people who don't want to take climate change seriously just pay to avoid it. We can't have that. So there has to be a degree of regulation. The most important thing for me, though, is that climate change has got to get into the fabric of society, so that acting against the interests of the climate becomes something that we don't do as a matter of course. It becomes as antisocial as, say, smoking around a child is. Though 30, 40 years ago, that was considered fairly normal.
Thanks very much. Same question to Georgia for the Green Party.
Hi, thanks. Thanks very much for that question. And this is a really important question, and actually central to one of the reasons why people have been resisting taking action on the climate emergency. And I think it's absolutely essential that we invest in new industries, and that we're creating jobs, new types of jobs, and transitioning people through regular training and skills. We're going to proposing investing $2 billion in training and skills. We're going to create millions of jobs in the renewable energy sector, in the transport sector, in land management and other sectors. We're going to be investing in rural areas, rewilding, but also supporting farms and rural jobs to have a greener way of doing farming. And so, and also in doing all of this, we will be working with the unions and negotiating with them in the particular sectors which is really important for making sure we're all together to agree on the way forward for people to have jobs.
Thanks, Georgia. And over to Angie for the Labour Party.
Thank you. Labour is very focused on taking power out of the hands of the 1% and putting it back into the 99%'s hands. And one of the key ways of doing that in terms of the climate emergency is ensuring that everybody who works currently in a polluting industry has the chance to get a job in a green industry. So we do propose a green industrial revolution. We are looking at, for example, guaranteed jobs for everybody who works in one of those polluting industry. They will be retrained to work in green industry. We're looking at climate apprenticeships. But really the key crux of our promise is that we will combine social justice with justice for the planet. Leading on a little bit into what Chris was saying, we do also believe in an internationalist vision. So no country acting singularly can actually combat the climate crisis. We must work together. We must support countries across the globe in fighting this emergency. One of the ways we will do this is by cracking down on the grossly polluting top 100 companies, so that they will actually be removed from the FTSE 100, the Financial Times Share Index. Sorry, get the words right. If they are shown not to be meeting the stringent climate standards that we will be asking of them. So we're looking at a manifold approach really to ensuring that workers, in conjunction with the trade unions, get a fair deal, whilst ensuring that the planet gets a fair deal as well.
Thanks very much, Andy. So tonight is truly a community event, and questions were open not just to adults but also to young people. I'm delighted to say we have a couple of questions from some younger members in the audience. So I would like to hand over to Maya, I think she's a student at school, to ask her question of the panel.
How long do we actually have to reduce our carbon emissions in order to stay within the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold? And what consequences can we expect if we exceed this level of warming?
Thanks, Maya. Okay, so I think we'll hand that question over to Georgia for the Green Party first off.
Hi, Maya, thanks for that question. So we have, according to the IPCC, until 2030 to keep our emissions low enough to make sure we don't reach more than 2 degrees warming, but the safer level would be 1.5 degrees. If we don't, I mean, this was told to us 3 years ago. We were told we had 12 years then. So now we have less time to catch up, and we know that we're not even reaching the targets that we set for this year under the Paris Agreement. So every year that goes past, we're kind of having to do much more catch-up. The consequences will be, we're already seeing the consequences with huge increases in weather instability. The increase in rain that we're seeing now, I know we get a lot of rain in this country anyway, but this is because of the drying out in the hotter areas of the world, and the water then comes into our area and then gets dumped, and we're seeing very heavy rainfalls. But even in subtropical areas, there's huge flooding. Some of the planting is impossible, so there's already breakdown in farming and animals dying.
Thanks very much, Georgia.
Yeah, sorry.
It's not a party political question, so I'd like to hand over to Anna to get your view.
Hi, Maya. I don't know the answer, and I think that there isn't actually consensus on this from the scientific community. A lot of people said that the IPCC report was too conservative. It has to be reviewed by so many people that actually it errs on the side of being cautious, and that actually we may already have gone beyond the opportunity to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, which is an absolutely terrifying prospect. It's terrifying for me, and I'm sure it's terrifying for you. We are, as I said before, entering into uncharted territory. We don't know what will happen upwards of 1.5 degrees, and this is because the planet is an incredibly complex system. We've never been here before. We certainly haven't been here before, for 11,000, 12,000 years since the beginning of the Holocene. So we don't know. And in that not knowing is an enormous amount of fear. We know there are things that we can do. We know that there are things that we should have been doing for years and years and years and years. We need to rapidly decarbonise. We know the things that we need to do. But I think the thing to say is that, even when I talk about it to you, I feel shame, actually, and I feel very sad. But I think that there is hope. And I think that we can, as a species, come to the collective realisation that we need. This is not just about us in this room, this is about everybody all over the planet realising it, and us all working together. Upwards of 2 degrees, this is the thing, the feedback loops are potentially so unpredictable that we don't know. Thanks very much.
Same question to Chris from Lib Dems.
Maya, I'm going to answer this one numerically. The world scientists say we have up to 400 gigatons of greenhouse gases more that we can emit before we break through the amount that will keep us under 1.5 degrees. We're currently emitting at 42 per year. That's why we talk about a 10-year emergency, but it's less than 10 years now, because 42 is more than a tenth of 400. And that's why we have to take immediate action. Why I have no difficulty agreeing with XR's demand for immediate action. But this explains the Lib Dem policy of the 2-stage thing. We've got to have the 10-year emergency programme where we more than halve our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 as part of a plan to become net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. And it's just a question of being realistic about this, because we are not in sole control of this. There are other countries around the world who could completely scupper our efforts, but that does not mean we stop our efforts. In fact, if anything, as a developed country, it's vital that we set the example, because if you think about it, if we were to say, oh, well, we mustn't allow the Chinese and the Indians and the Brazilians to have the kind of industrial development that we enjoyed, I mean, that would be so arrogant. That would be a new form of imperialism, which we must avoid happening. But we must work with them, and we must set the example by being within our own limits. And that's why we have set this target to be net zero by 2045. Because we talk about sometimes saving the planet. That's a bad phrase for me. The planet will survive. The planet will somehow manage to keep going. It's us that we will, our civilization that we will kill. And the thing that gets me is we've been so incredibly clever to create the world we have, the interdependence. We can talk to Australia on our smartphones, and yet are we going to be so unbelievably clever as to be incredibly stupid that we can't actually see that we're killing off the goose that laid the golden egg?
Thanks, Chris.
That's why I mean we need to address this now.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to ask Mairead what your thoughts are on this.
Well, I'd just like to build on what Anna said about how we've never been through this before. Because although, of course, science is really developed nowadays, we have a lot of new technology, and theories are always coming out about what the truth is, but it's a sort of sketch of a guess at the truth, because we've never experienced anything like this, so there is no real way of knowing really what's going to happen. And I think we should be careful with drawing conclusions as to how long we have or what we need to do, and almost resting in the safety of that and saying, oh well, if we stick to these guidelines we'll be fine. I think it needs to be always doing the maximum rather than doing up to what the guidelines have suggested.
Thanks, Mairead. Andy from Labour.
So I'm pleased that Labour are working towards the IPCC target of reducing the bulk of carbon emissions by 2030. I think my concern is if we have another 5 years of a Conservative government, we're not going to be anywhere near meeting those targets. It's a great shame that Nisgani declined the invitation to attend this evening.
Are you going to say why she declined?
We can pick that up at the end, I think.
I just want to talk to you about some of the planning decisions that have been made by Wealden District Council, which completely fly in the face of climate rationale, really. And obviously that is a Conservative-led council. So, for example, I used to live in Hailsham, and they built a whole housing estate on a floodplain. So now they've just very recently had flooding in Hailsham. We've got in Uckfield, where I live now, they're just about to build a housing development on a piece of green land where there are dormice in residence, and I will be doing my very best to stop that from happening. But what is happening at the moment is basically hampering the journey to get to zero carbon emissions, because there's no infrastructure being built. So, for example, Hailsham, if you don't know it, has very poor transport links, and the town is basically clogged by cars at rush hour, completely gridlocked, which is obviously adding to carbon emissions every single day. We have around the world, looking at a more global perspective, people like Bolsonaro, who have allowed the Amazon rainforest to burn. We have Trump, who reneged on his commitments, or his country's commitments, to keep to the Paris Agreement. So all around us are people who are trying to stop the fight against climate change and the climate emergency. So we absolutely need to act now.
Thanks, Angie. Are you hearing us okay?
Yeah.
Great stuff. Okay. Next question is from Denise Spinney.
The climate crisis has awoken, interesting to hear what you've just been talking about, awoken in many people feelings of fear and hopelessness. How does your party plan to ignite the public imagination with a positive, hopeful picture of the sort of collaborative future we need to be creating?
Thanks, Denise. Okay, I'll put the question to Angie from Labour first, please.
It's a good question. So I don't know about any sort of communications campaigns plans, but what we are trying to do is to really try and ignite the sense that there are 99% of us working together, not just around the climate, but around the whole range of social injustices. So we are basically trying to give the message that basically 1% of people in the country hold control of so many resources, whether they be financial resources, energy resources, and also pollution capability. So we're trying to ignite people around this message, the many, not the few message that you might have seen. That also relates to acting together on climate emergency. So we really want to spread the word that people power is important for moving this country forward. We can't just rely on capitalists, we can't just rely on people who've been educated in Eton. We have to step up to the plate together and do something about this.
And Chris from the Lib Dems.
Many years ago, I came across a number of studies that showed that if you embrace the environmental imperative, you actually create more jobs than traditional forms of industry do. And this is the thing that's got completely lost. And when we talk about actually switching the economy to a green economy, this is to generate jobs. This is also, I have this belief, which may be bordering more on a religious than a scientific belief, that actually when people have a greater connection with the work they're doing and they can see what the work is actually achieving in the general scheme of things, they are happier, and that leads to lower levels of crime and greater levels of social cohesion. And I think one of the real failings of the environmental movement, and I was saying this back in the 1990s, is that we have become a negative movement. Partly it's a media problem, because whenever the media ask a member of an environmental organisation for a comment, it's normally to say, oh, this is a terrible idea. It's only in response to the government wanting to do something or a big company wanting to do something. And as a result, we've been allowed to paint ourselves as a negative movement. For me, there is so much positivity that can come out of really grasping the nettle, and we've got to push this. I could pick out a few things from the Liberal Democrat manifesto if you want, but actually I don't think it's about that. I think it's about just saying there is so much that we can take from this. I use my car as little as possible, and the quality of journeys when I'm walking or cycling is greater because I meet people. It doesn't always help the timekeeping, because you stop and you chat to people, but that for me is about quality of life. It's about exercise. It's about making sure that at the end of the day I've actually moved all the joints in my body, which wouldn't necessarily be the case if I just got into a car the whole time. So much about tackling climate change is positive. We can create visions of towns of the future which are exciting. We haven't yet done this. I'm just talking about the Liberal Democrats or about politics. I'm talking about the whole environmental movement. And that's a big area that we've yet to move into. So Denise, I know that's slightly avoiding your question, but it's a big growth area for us to try and make fighting climate change exciting.
And same question to Georgia from the Greens.
Yeah, thanks, Denise, for that question. I mean, I think it's all very well to have nice, exciting pictures about the future, but there are people in this country right now who are living very difficult lives, and they can't imagine how their lives are going to improve. You know, we've had quite a huge increase in the use of food banks, and even though there are high levels of employment, that's masking something really not right going on. The fact that there are so many people using food banks, and the poverty rate, children living in poverty, could rise as much as up to 34.5% by 2023. So, you know, one of our policies is to implement universal basic income, to give people that basic security, to take that stress out of their lives so that they can start contributing in different ways and connecting with each other in different ways. And I think this is absolutely essential to building a positive future for us. Every single person under this UBI will be better off in some way. So I think that's absolutely essential. And then also having better health, you know, investing more in the NHS. We're going to put in 6 billion more every year into the NHS, plus another extra billion for nurses, and reinstate the bursaries. So there are really clear and important efforts that we need to make that will build this more positive future that we need to look for. We need to see it concrete. We need to see the money on the table. It's sad to say, but we need to also see how people are going to work together to do this.
Thanks very much, Georgia. It's like Mairead would like to comment.
Yeah, I'd just like to talk about how, this is a scary thing, and to stray away from politics and just look at the general well-being of everyone here, of everyone in the country, even in the world. How if you're really actively trying to change something, giving up, losing hope, getting depressed, stressing yourself out is really not going to enhance how much of a change you can really make. And I just like to put forward a little image that can help people with remaining hopeful, which is the idea of discontinuous change. If I were to describe it as an analogy with a water bottle, if you put a bottle of room temperature water in a freezer, there's a continuous change in the temperature of the water as it decreases. However, if the freezer door was transparent and you could watch the process, you wouldn't actually see a change until the key moment where the water changes state and freezes. And that's the discontinuous change. So I think it's just something to bear in mind when you're trying to make a change, to think that, you know, sometimes you can't always see incremental changes in the process that you're trying to cause to happen. So just to remain hopeful even when you can't see an immediate change.
I just want to absolutely second that and say that that's what I wanted to say to you, Maya, is that in that uncharted space beyond 1.5 degrees, you know, obviously there's a lot of fear, but there's also huge potential for positive change. Mairead just nailed it. So thanks.
Denise, did you want to respond to those party pieces? Has your imagination been ignited?
It was great to hear from Mairead, actually, with that analogy with the freezing of the water, and that you don't see it until the last minute. That, as you said, and it nails it for me, is that I think I got a sense of the... I'm not sure it's going to be business as usual in terms of we can just switch it over to kind of green industry and that's going to be great. I suspect it's going to need to go further and deeper than that, but even if a first pass is to kind of green things up. I think we're going to need more, and we're going to need that kind of attitude and approach to be out there and be shared all the time, of saying, don't give up, it matters that you don't give up, which I think is a Stephen Hawking thing.
Thank you. So our next question is from Aisha. Am I saying your name right? And I believe Aisha's 12 years old, is that right?
What 3 practical steps have you personally taken in the past decade to mitigate climate change?
Thanks, Aisha. Okay, over to Mairead first.
Well, I think there are so many small practical things and some bigger practical things which you can change in your own life and which really shouldn't be ignored. I mean, from choosing to take ferries or trains or other forms of public transport rather than flying, to simply recycling in your house, switching the lights off. They're all things that we've been telling ourselves we need to do the whole time. There's little signs up everywhere reminding us to. But I think a lot of people have the attitude that that's something so small, it's not really going to make a difference. And a lot of people can't really be bothered to do that. But I walk around this school switching lights off every day. I walk and cycle everywhere I go, partially because I can't drive yet. And yeah, I try not to fly as well. And other things like going vegetarian or vegan are quite important. So
thanks, Mairead. Chris from the Lib Dems.
It's often harder to do things when you feel you've been doing them for years anyway. I stopped eating beef at 9 and stopped eating meat at 14. I tell you, it was a lot harder to do then than it is now. And these days, as a vegetarian, I seem quite mainstream, given that there's an awful lot of pescatarians and vegans and all the rest of it. But and I always cycled, I've always turned lights off, always driven low annual mileage in a small car. The 3 steps that I've taken, I've cut my flying down considerably. I wanted to do one of those tests where you measure your own emissions in your everyday life, and I thought I was doing quite well actually until I added the flying, and it absolutely wrecked my personal balance. And I thought, I must make a serious effort to cut that down, because I fly a lot for my work, but I don't anymore actually. I fly maybe 2 return flights a year these days. Given that I used to be away about 23 weeks a year, that is a considerable reduction. It can come down further, but I've also taken to growing my own food. Not everything, but I really do make an effort to grow food, and the satisfaction in eating a tomato that I have grown myself is just so amazing. I went several weeks without having to buy any salad at all this summer. That was really, really good. And the third thing I would say is I have just continued to push the gospel, if you like, because so many people think, oh yeah, you can't really say that. It's a bit like talking about religion or politics, isn't it? You don't do that with your friends. Well, yes, actually, we do. We've got to make it clear that acting against the interests of the planet is no longer acceptable. And sometimes we can make ourselves look nerdy and stupid and sticklers for rules and all the rest of it, but actually that's important, however embarrassing it can sometimes be. So those are the 3 things, Aisha, that I would offer to my own Museum of Curiosity.
Same question to Anna.
I have given up short-haul flying. I'd like to say I've given up flying entirely. That's not strictly true. I have hardly ever eaten meat. I eat the odd table-house chicken. But all of those kind of individual actions, they're really, really important. But this was a year in which I stepped into climate activism, I guess, and I joined XR and I set up the local group here. That felt like a big step for me, having never done anything of that sort really before. And then with 2 local mums, Joanne McInnes, who's here tonight, and Naomi Worsner, both of whom have had kids at Michael Hall, we got together around a kitchen table and we thought about what we could do as mothers, as creative people, and we set up a campaign called Letters to the Earth. We got over 1,000 submissions, many from Michael Hall with the incredible help of Margita. It's now a book. And this just came from a conversation around a kitchen table. It's a wonderful thing. It's full of hope. It's got Mairead's letter in there. It's got loads of letters from Michael Hawkins. It's got letters from all over the world, from incredible people. And this is a testament, you know, just to say, if you just get together and talk and share and think about what you can do, extraordinary things can happen. We have some of the leading writers in the UK. We've got Jackie Morris, the most beautiful illustrator, who gave us wings. She gave us a swallow. You know, hope is everywhere. We just need to harness it together. So,
thanks, Anna. Same question to Angie.
Yeah, thanks, Aisha. It's a really nice question, and one I could go on about for hours, but I've only got 2 minutes. So I mentioned earlier about my journey to try and become a vegan, and George Monbiot says that the greatest single contribution you can make as an individual is to become vegan. So, like Chris, I've been vegetarian for a long, long time, 30 years, and I remember strange things like mock duck and saucilatas in tins, which luckily we've moved away from a bit now. But I started off going vegan for 1 day a week, and just recently moved up to 2 days a week, so I'm getting there gradually, only 5 more days to go. I try to be as plastic-free as possible, so I've moved away from things like shower gel, just to use bars of soap from the health food shop. I have bamboo toothbrush. I try to buy any unwrapped veg. So just trying to take as much single-use plastic out of my life as possible, and my family's life, because they have to abide by it by default. And the third thing that we've done this year, which is really nice, I think, is we've created a wildlife garden at home. So we've basically made it as biodiverse as possible. I'm lucky because my husband's a gardener, and he knows about these sort of things. So we've made plants that attract bees, for example. We've got lots of bird feeders. We've got a bee hotel, and I was absolutely super excited when bees actually moved into the bee hotel. So it's all small things, but the small things add up, and I'm proud to be doing them.
And Georgia.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to thank Chris for calling out Miss Ghani's ridiculous leaflet that she sent round about what we can all do to combat climate change. That's a real typical climate deniers action, and that's being used more and more to make us all feel terribly guilty about how we live our lives, when in fact we're slaves to a system that's been set up that's very difficult to individually change. We all need to change it together. Personally, what I do, I've got solar panels, I cycle as many places as I possibly can, I do wear a helmet and use lights, just in case anyone's worried. I only eat meat from Tablehurst, and usually only a small amount because it's so expensive. My buying decisions are changing rapidly, day by day. The only festival I went to this year was the Green Gathering, which is completely powered by solar panels. And also in my work, I'm trying to call this out all the time. I work internationally on projects, development projects, and the UK aid is way behind on this. They're still funding pesticides and farming projects. I try and stop this. And also, just on a big health project that I'm working on at the moment, we work with health colleges. I've decided we're going to have as a legacy at the end of the project, every single health college is going to have a whole bunch of trees planted there, indigenous food-providing trees that will be a legacy and will be kept there to remind the government to keep on funding health workers and trying to integrate it.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question is from Alistair.
Green Heart of our constituency is the Ashdown Forest. It's incredibly precious and it's incredibly fragile. Now this is due to lose its annual 500k grant from the EU when we leave on January the 31st. Can the candidates commit to how their party will replace and protect this funding so this fragile and valued local asset can continue to thrive?
Thanks for your question, Alistair. Over to Chris.
Yes, I'm very well aware of this. In fact, in an attempt to draw attention to it, I wrote a little story called Brexit at Pooh Corner, which I've recorded. It's in the style of Winnie the Pooh. It's available on my Twitter feed if you want to listen to it. It's about 7.5 minutes, and I've read it very much in the style of Winnie the Pooh. It's called In Which Pooh and Eeyore Get Very Worried About Brexit, and it's all about the loss of the potential loss of the grant. I've talked to a couple of Ashdown Forest conservators about this, and they have said the government is guaranteeing it until 2025. I don't believe that guarantee is worth a thing. I think that we could well end up losing it at the end of it's guaranteed for 2020, but I worry about 2021. If you're wanting me to say, would a Liberal Democrat government guarantee to keep that money, I can't give you an answer to that because there isn't the detail in our policy, and I've learned over the years, don't say things unless you're absolutely sure about them, because then you're promising people things that you can't necessarily deliver. But first thing is that our policy is to stay in the EU. We do everything we can to stay in the EU so that that grant doesn't get lost. If we leave the EU, you can be sure that the Lib Dems won't be in government, because if we have any influence, we will not be leaving the EU, at least not without a second referendum. So I cannot believe there are any contingency plans for us to find all the money that we would lose, not just for the Ashdown Forest, but for all the things that come from EU funding. But I cannot say specifically, because the answer is quite honestly, I don't know.
Thanks, Chris. Same question to Angie.
Yeah, I'm aware that already Ashdown Forest is suffering from the impact of pollution. I know that the heathland is suffering at the moment. And again, I know that it's not written in as a concrete manifesto, like naming Ashdown Forest in the Labour manifesto. But what we have done is that we've said that we will protect and restore biodiversity and natural habitats. And certainly if I were elected as MP, I would be pushing to protect the Ashdown Forest because it's such a valuable resource for this area, not least because it sucks so much carbon out of the air. Part of my answer is going to hark back to an earlier answer, we also need to have sustainable transport systems, which obviously are heavily featured within Labour's manifesto. We've got so many cars going through the Ashdown Forest. I think it's 20,000 go past one side of the Ashdown Forest every single day. We just need to be trying to get some of those cars off of the road by offering people transport solutions that actually work for them. At the moment, we've just got a jigsaw puzzle which is missing so many pieces that it just doesn't work for people. I mean, you can get a bus from Uckfields to Eastbourne and it takes an hour and a half, and it doesn't run at the weekends. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So we just need a joined-up approach to making sure that development is sustainable, it's not being built on green land. We need to take the cars off of the road going up and down past all areas of Wealden, not just the Ashdown Forest. And I would definitely pledge to ensuring that the subject of the Ashdown Forest was brought up in Parliament if I were elected.
Georgia?
Did you say Georgia? Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, thank you. So we do have a policy to restore nature and the countryside, and we have a plan to invest in trees, and also that 50% of farms will be involved in agroforestry by 2030, and also that the management of areas of outstanding natural beauty like the Ashdown Forest will come into local authority control and will be funded through local authority, and there will be an increase in funding going to local authorities for a range of different issues. So that would be the plan, I think. Well, and if I were in Parliament, I would, of course, as the Wealden representative, be bringing this up as an issue in Parliament, along with the protection and funding of other important natural locations.
I'm just wondering, it's not, I mean, Anna and Mairead, as local people, do you have any responses when you hear that? Would you like to add anything?
I'd just like to thank you for bringing that up. I've really enjoyed
walks at least once a week in the surrounding area, sometimes in the Ashdown Forest. And yeah, it is something really precious, and I'm glad that someone here wants to look out for it.
Yeah, I moved here from London 3 years ago she was a baby then, with my daughter, and we have daily walks. We're lucky enough to live close to the golf course, and so we can go, to the yew tree. That's part of her psychic landscape, it's just an extraordinary thing to me, that's part of her life. And to see her innate love of the natural world, how she belongs to it without question, is just the most astonishing thing to me. So it's really reawakened in me after years of living in London, just how precious it is, and how precious these sort of daily relationships that we're lucky enough to have are, and how so many people are severed from that. And what a great tragedy that is. So yes, we must do all that we can to protect it.
Thanks, Anne. Alistair, did you have a response you wanted to make in regards to the comments from the party candidates?
I think that's all really heartening. My only real sorrow this evening is that our parliamentary candidate, who is absent this evening, uses the Ashdown Forest as the backdrop to her publicity photos and chose not to be with us here this evening. I think it says an awful lot about what she stands for.
Thanks, Alistair. Okay, the next question is from Kiki, who I understand is also 12 years old. Is that right?
Yeah.
Great.
In 2019, the IPCC found industrial farming and overfishing to be the main drivers of species extinctions. How can we change this going forward?
Thanks, Kiki. I'm going to put that one to Georgia.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Kiki. It's really terrifying, actually, because the use of pesticides and herbicides have been increasing at a really high rate, and I think that we have a policy of, first of all, creating a new ecocide law, which will prevent crimes against the natural environment, and this will include crimes that will endanger species. You've probably seen recently in the news that we've lost 50% of insect species since the 1970s. When I was a kid, there were insects all over the place during summer, and it's so silent and empty now. This is having a knock-on effect on on the whole of the ecosystem, and will eventually affect our food production as well. So we would immediately ban the most harmful pesticides, including glyphosate, which I can't pronounce, and also introduce new rigorous tests for all pesticides, and be phasing out anything that is thought to be harmful, and there would be immediate action on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Georgia. Angie?
Yeah, I'm pleased to say that Labour has a suite of policies on this. We've already mentioned food poverty, so that obviously is very important in considering this argument as well. Food bank usage is up 43% in Wealden in the last year, according to the Trussell Trust. So what we need to make sure, and what's built into Labour's manifesto, is that we are championing local food production, and Labour has committed to ensuring that we will replace the European food quotas with a similar financial system, but that it will basically champion a structural fund to support environmental land management and sustainable food production. So I personally would want to see an end to factory farming. I would want to see small farms being boosted, and Labour plans to get more people into farming, into the smaller farming environments, rather than the factory production that we have at the moment. We want to basically put farmers, fishermen and food producers at the heart of food production at a smaller scale level. So, for example, promoting the use of cooperatives, as they do in places like Spain and Europe. We would also make sure that fishing quotas would be distributed fairly, so they were basically distributed on the grounds of equality rather than just money. So we have thought quite carefully about this, and I know that we will think carefully again about how to make sure that the food that we have is not damaging to the environment. We certainly don't want a situation like we have in Argentina, where there are huge swathes of beef cattle who are responsible for so many carbon emissions. I personally would also encourage people to become vegetarian and vegan. That's not in the Labour Party manifesto, it's just a personal thing. But yeah, we're trying to do our bit, and as I say, it's something that we're thinking about very carefully.
Thanks, Angie. Chris?
Well, actually, becoming vegetarian is part of the Lib Dem manifesto, it's part of our climate change programme, but as a recommendation rather than compulsory, I hasten to add. In my opening remarks, I talked about how Extinction Rebellion was really where I was 30 years ago. The real tragedy here is that the modern environmental movement really began, I think, in 1962 with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was all about how species were becoming extinct. The birds were dying off because of pesticide use, in particular one, DDT, back in the 60s. That got the environmental movement going, and yet here we are in 2019, we're still fighting these battles. And Kiki, you're quite right to bring this up. And I can give you all sorts of, Lib Dem policies about coming down hard on, pollution of rivers and infringements, but in a way, coming down hard on infringements is a small part of it. The biggest worry is how many pesticides are still allowed. And this is where I'd like to make a quick shout out to a charity based in Brighton, small charity doing fantastic work called Pesticide Action Network. Punch well above their weight, and a little charitable trust fund that I'm involved in puts a bit of money their way, simply because they're doing such a good job of alerting people to the use of pesticides and fighting all sorts of things, both at Brussels and in London. The influence of the chemical industries is very malign. At the heart of liberalism is this belief that you do not carry on an economic activity if it is damaging to the environment, because that damages the common good. And therefore, any proposal that we put forward to make for a greener economy has got to include the basic presumption that if it damages the nature chain, and that's what species extinction is all about, is it protecting the nature chain, we must say this is not good for the economy as well as not being good for the environment.
Thanks very much. Very nice. Are you making notes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Kiki, you just go to the heart of this, the way that we have sourced our food and the way that we have behaved as though we have the right to source our food for the last, well, how far back do we go? To the dawn of agriculture? I don't know, but I mean, certainly with the kind of industrial farming and the overfishing, we're at the edge of a cliff. We simply cannot go on sourcing our food in this way. And you can see with the generation below us, there are so many young people who veganism, it's not even a choice. It's like, how could you not be vegan? And yet, at my time, I'm nearly 45, and I've been a vegetarian for years, but it's like I'm looking at young people and thinking, oh my God, of course we should all be vegan, thank you. But I think what I feel about this is that, we've just taken the wrong tack, right? We've done this. We've thought that we could source our food in this way. We're at this critical point. The solutions are there. The solutions are there, and the solutions are working with nature. I mean, I don't know if anybody heard Isabella Tree on, showing my age, on Radio 4 on Desert Island Disc. She's got her Wealden project at NEP, and she's just talking about working with animals. The way that working with animals just completely changes the way that land responds. Land responds and gives in ways that we can't predict. Again, it comes back to the fact that it's a complex system. We've treated a complex system as though we can batter it over the head enough times and it will give us what we want. We're at this point now, we can't do it anymore. But the solutions are there. people are working in extraordinary ways, you know. There were dots of light all over the place. Those dots of light are joining up.
Great. Thanks, Anna. Marie?
I'd just like to point out that a key part in solving this issue is education on nutrition, because a lot of people will eat like two fast food burgers a day, and if you told them they can't have their Burger King or McDonald's, they'd probably be quite upset. But big companies like this are sponsoring the felling of the Amazon to provide space to grow feed for cattle, to make these burgers. And if people were educated on the fact that you don't need 2 burgers a day in terms of the amount of protein, and that you can get the protein from somewhere else, then I think those industries could really be cut down.
I can't believe we're actually bang on time. So, the last question that we have this evening is coming from Steve Cook. Have we got Steve?
Steve here.
Next one?
Over there.
Have we got Steve? He's here.
You need to come over here because this is where the mic is.
Hi, thanks. It was actually going back to about the public transport that we were speaking about earlier on. Although we desperately need, I live in Nutley, and we desperately need more buses coming in and out into Uckfield and so on. The problem is I can't see anything changing with the bus layout for the next few years. They're going to keep emitting diesel the whole time. And with cars getting hopefully greener, more hybrids, more electrics coming along, is it still a relevant policy to try and increase buses in the rural areas all the time, given that they're going to be choking as you're going along, queuing into Uckfield, which is notorious? They're kind of spewing out diesel, whereas at least a hybrid or electric car wouldn't be doing that. Just one of them is still worth pursuing.
Thanks very much, Steve. Okay. This is the last question, so I'm going to be really strict on time. So first of all, 2 minutes. Can we go to Angie first, please?
Yeah, so one of the things within the Labour manifestos, we are giving councils the power to take bus routes back into council ownership, not necessarily back into council ownership. One of the things that we've been discussing on our climate emergency group in Uckfield is the possibility of green buses. So you're probably aware of the big lemon bus in Brighton that I think it was originally powered by cooking oil, and they now have some solar-powered buses as well. So I think it was within our gift to have public transport that is also green. And the big advantage, of course, of public transport, like buses, is it takes cars off the road. So I have no idea about the mathematics about how many, like how much carbon emissions, like say 30 cars compares to a bus. But I'm certainly committed myself and in my council activities towards making sure that our public transport is greener. We just have to make sure that there are networks of public transport, including villages. And talking again about the town council, I know it does sponsor one of the village buses that goes from Ashdown Forest to Heathfield and to the villages as well. So it is perfectly doable for local authorities if they're given the power to ensure that there are networks of public transport that work for people and that do take cars off of the road.
Thanks very much, Andy. And Georgia from the Greens.
Yeah, we would be proposing investing in a fleet of electric buses and other forms of public transport. Public transport is absolutely essential, not just because we want to get cars off the road, but there's plenty of vulnerable people and teenagers and ageing population who either can't use a car or it's unsafe to use a car. And a lot of those people are stranded and are relying on volunteers at the moment. So we really do need to have much better public transport. So there will be this investment, and like Labour, we would be proposing to bring these buses into local authority control, and so that planning for them, and obviously they would have to coordinate across county and district borders in order to make sure that there was a comprehensive public transport system. And in addition to that, investing in cycle lanes, safe cycle lanes and walking routes, so that there are other options for people to travel.
Thanks, Rita. And Chris.
To answer your question, Steve, which is a very good one, is it still relevant to promote buses when there are diesel buses around? Yes, it is, definitely. For a start, if you have a diesel bus and there's enough people on it, the emissions per passenger will be less than the average car, especially if the car has a 1.2 person occupancy rating, which is what most cars do tend to have. So yes, it is worth having. But also that's an interregnum, if you like, before the electric buses come in. And they will come in, it's just taking a bit of time at the moment. We have to allow for the research and development, but they will eventually come in. And by then, we have to have the culture that we go by bus whenever we can. We need to encourage that shift in thinking that says, I only use the car if I really need to. And in many cases, it makes no sense to do so. I've shied away from reading off lots of Liberal Democrat policies because I find that risks making us candidates into slight automatons. But I'm going to break that here to say, in the Lib Dem manifesto, we plan to restore bus routes, add new bus routes where there's a local need, and we'll provide 4.5 billion over 5 years for this programme. We have a strategy to encourage walking and cycling. And we're going to build on the successful local sustainable transport fund. That was something that Norman Baker, MP for Lewis, introduced when he was the junior transport minister in the coalition government from 2010 to 2013. Phenomenally successful. We also need to do things like making sure that public transport is more accessible so that people who have disabilities don't miss out either. But absolutely, we must move towards a system where more public transport gets used. And you could do anything with load factors. You could say that an aeroplane is efficient if it's full compared to a car that has one driver in it. But we must work on the basis that public transport is there for you in reasonable amounts so that people can rely on it.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so now we go to our final question of the evening, which we have shared with the panellists ahead of time so that they can share their vision for the future with you. So the question that we sent out was, if you personally got voted into Parliament on the 12th of December, what would your priority be in terms of addressing the climate crisis? And I'm going to ask Anna first.
Gosh, what would it be? I think it would be to say that all of this talk of 12 years and of however many parts per million CO2 and all of these facts are incredibly important, and urgency is so important. But what I would want to say and what I would hope to bring about is the capacity to act with the utmost of urgency, and yet also leave space for dreaming and leave space for listening to our children and to the natural world and to the voices of people in the global south who are already suffering the effects of catastrophic climate change, to the voices of activists in this country who have been fighting for social justice for very many years already, from whom we can learn so much. So I guess it's just finding that balance at this critical point in our political history and our history as a species to somehow walk that line.
I totally forgot to say, it's strictly 1 minute each. Mairead, if you got voted into Parliament, what would you focus on?
Well, since I'm not actually a politician or anything, I'd like to just remind everyone here who is active in XR or other climate groups or anything like that, of something which I think is really important, which is to look after yourselves, because it's very easy to get caught up in looking after everyone and everything else. But in order to make a real contribution, you need to remain healthy, focused, and in balance.
Thanks, Mairead. And so Chris, from the Lib Dems.
I think it's the thing I would want to do is to create this positive vision. I've already talked about it, about let's make fighting climate change positive. I love Forest Row. Some of you may know me because you've danced with me in the gym next door or in the Peter Griffiths Hall. I come here regularly to dance with Sarah Davis, and I just love this place. It allows me to switch off from politics, from learning my living, from anything else in life. But it's not Forest Row that we need to convince. It's the people who either don't know climate change or they have so many other things going on in their life that they think, oh, I can't be bothered with that. They must be bothered with it. But we can only get them interested if we make it exciting, if we make it something that everybody can benefit from, if we make it something that we can work towards and it becomes something that they can embrace as part of having a better life. And that will come much more if they can feel that they're part of something rather than that we in the affluent southeast hector them on. I think you'll see that the three party policies represented here are all pretty good on climate change. The shame is we're all having to fight each other here when the real enemy is the person who's not here. She can be beaten, but only if we all vote smartly. Thank you.
How would that be? I mean, if the two of you were to stand down, and then Angie, might have a chance of beating.
There's no standing aside here, so therefore people have to vote tactically. I mean, in a way, the democratic process should not require standing aside. It should have a fair system. But as we haven't got a fair system, people have to game it, and that's where tactical voting comes in.
But there's a way in which you could stand aside and say, I'm only doing this because the climate is the most important question for this election.
And we've done that in 60 seats with Greens and Plaid Cymru, the Unite to Remain Alliance, which is about Brexit and climate change.
So, I'm going to ask Angie.
Thanks. So I want to share with you how years and years ago, when I was a kid, many years ago, there was a film, I don't know if you remember it, was called When the Wind Blows, and it was about nuclear war. And I was absolutely terrified about the prospect of nuclear war at that time, not just because of that film, but because of everything that was going on in the news at the time. And working together, that fear kind of became negated over the years. The possibility of nuclear war kind of lessened. So I think that now the things that kids are really, really scared of is green emergency and climate change. And I would really, really want to be a small cog in the wheel that starts the green revolution that starts to remedy this situation. I'm really proud to be part of a party that has so many green policies, that puts workers at its heart, that plans to have a green revolution that involves transforming our transport infrastructure, our industry, our energy production. I just want to be able to take some of the fear out of kids' hearts and adults' hearts. We have to act now and we have to work together on this.
Thanks, Angie. And over to Georgia from the Green Party.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this issue is way too important to be partisan. We all have to work together. I mean, I would use my experience of working with the United Nations, with foreign governments, and in government here, and working with Parliament to bring everyone together. I would definitely push hard for a Green New Deal to be implemented by any government that's in power, and I vigorously support a people's vote. Specifically for Wealden, I'd want to see vastly expanded low-cost public transport, safe roads, and an end to Gatwick expansion, increase funding for local authorities and provide services for children, youth and the ageing population, as well as end gender-based violence and social and community-owned sustainable housing. And finally, I'll aim for our country to be an inspiration and support for global action, which is as we should be. I'll push for diplomatic and international action and solidarity to tackle the climate and ecological emergency.
So it's my job to close. We've had a very, very well-behaved panel. We're back on time, so thanks very much for this evening. So first of all, I would like to thank everyone who joined us. Coming from this end, the far end, Mairead, who is representing... It's a really big deal to sit up here. None of the people sat here actually knew what questions were going to be posed from the audience tonight. So yeah, thanks ever so much. Thank you to Georgia Taylor from the Green Party. Thanks to Chris Bowers from the Lib Dems. Thanks to Andy Smith from the Labour Party. And thanks to Anna Hope. Getting that question in at the end was great.
So that we have a stall here selling letters to the earth for £10. Please buy it. Wonderful, wonderful book.
Yeah, before you go, the table's over there with the book stand set up. And before you do go, I would like to thank you, the audience, for coming, because without you coming, we wouldn't have had an event like this. I think there's a couple of hundred people in the room, so as you leave, look around at how many people actually came out. And this is a community event arranged for the community by members of our local XR group, who are people from our community. And they put an immense amount of work in tonight to pull off what is a pretty professional event for a village near a forest. I think it's been quite amazing. And I'm absolutely delighted to have been part of it. So thanks so much everyone for coming. On the way out, buy a copy of Letters to the Earth. They're over there to your left. And have a safe journey home.
Yeah,